Hello everybody, it's Steph Unthank here from Infinity Wellness, and hi to Bridgette.
Hi Steph. Hi everyone.
Bridgette Sunman's from Be Active for Change. So yeah, really good to see everybody. Good to see you again, Bridgette. We're on episode 11 of the Mind Body Connective today, and it's been a fun ride. So it's been really good to kind of get these conversations going, talking about the connection between mind and body. A lot of our conversations have darted in different directions, which has been really good. So yeah, so thanks for following us, and please continue to do that. But yeah, Bridgette, we're here today. I know that you've got another book.
I have, yeah. I mean, although we're not doing a book club, and although we're not all authors ourselves,
not yet.
Not yet anyway. I think we've both got a book in us, at least one. Yeah, Steph and I are very inspired, obviously, by some of the books that are out there. And it's interesting because when we actually got together and sort of talked about the books that really resonated with us, there were a lot of familiar ones in there that we both read together. So the one that I wanted to just pick some things from in relation to some of the things that we've been talking about recently is the Gabor Maté, When the Body Says No, the cost of hidden stress. It felt very appropriate just to return to this for a few of the sort of call outs on some of the main themes that have come up through this series. And in particular, I was really fascinated by chapter 3, which is actually a chapter that talks about stress and emotional competence.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe stand out for you, and I maybe just give you a little bit more of a quote from there, Steph. There's a psychologist that Gabor talked to for that particular section, Dr. Ross Buck, and he talks about 3 levels of emotional response, classified according to the degree to which we are conscious of them. So he talks about emotion 3 being subjective, within ourselves, how we feel. He talks about emotion 2, which is when that is seen by others. So perhaps in the body language that we use, whether when we walk into the office, how we are, that frame of mind in the day, or when we're on our Zoom call, or because we're not walking into too many offices at the moment. And then emotion 1, the physiological changes. So things like the nervous system, the more subtle things like hormones, the immune changes, this fight or flight response that I know we're all very familiar with. They're things that just happen. And it just struck me that those really are noticing. And it really took me back to some of the conversations we've had in this series, Steph, about the importance of noticing. And yeah, how do those 3 emotions land with you?
They land quite heavily, I think. Yeah, they land quite heavily. I think only because from a place of this, the last part for me, the body awareness. So what's happening for us physiologically?
Yeah.
Emotions, yeah. Because I feel, when I say they land heavily, I mean from a place of I'm very aware of that, right? And I'll just talk about that just for a few seconds more. So I think prior to doing a lot of the work that I do now, if you'd taken me back 5 years ago, my level of awareness around what was happening for me in a physiological sense when my stress was heightened, I think was either non-existent or very, very little in terms of my level of awareness around what was happening there. I'm saying it landed heavily because it's become now a felt sense. So through, it does take practice. I know it takes
time.
It takes time to nurture a sense of awareness, a sense of being able to pay attention, a sense of being able to notice what's going on for us in a psychological sense, in order that we can connect the psychological position, let's say, of what's happening in that moment and match that up to how the body is responding. The reason that's landed quite heavily with me is because over the last few days I've had a couple of those moments. So it resonated really quickly when you said that. And we're all human, aren't we? So I don't mind talking about the fact that I still have my ups and downs. Of course I do. But yeah, over the last few days there's been a few moments like that where I felt a sense of psychological awareness where maybe there's some rumination going on, particularly rumination, some negative self-talk, some kind of a real sense of a deep connection to just not feeling quite right in my thoughts, and then noticing how that feels in my body, and then trying to do something with that in a way that causes me a bit less suffering. So yeah, so it really resonated, those 3 points.
So that's really interesting, that how you work with that, and that sort of brings me on quite nicely to the sort of second component that I wanted to call out in that chapter, which was he talks about self-regulation. So you're sort of talking to that already yourself, and that emotional competence, but as a way of the very best preventative medicine. And I really love that, because I think sometimes there's so much written, there's so many different people talking about well-being, and if we can make it really simple for people just to understand what it might be that can just be the trigger to start some of this work for them. As you say, it felt heavy, and I don't know your body, obviously I don't know how you sense, but I sensed it might be because it was realization of your journey, the work that you've done, that time that it's taken to develop that. And so I think what I wanted to say around that was, the self-regulation will take time. It's not suddenly going to happen, but just to be aware of the fact that we can self-regulate. And this wonderful phrase that I wanted to just read you, which was emotional competence is what we need to develop if we are to protect ourselves from the hidden stresses that create a risk to health. And it's what we need to regain if we are to heal.
Yeah.
And it feels right now that, there is a lot of healing that needs to be done for a number of reasons for this phase that we've just come through. But actually, arguably before that, I think there are already warning signals and signs. And you and I have seen it in the data and the insights that we've been looking at. So, yeah, is there anything that sort of particularly you wanted to call out around that, how we protect ourselves, the way we do that?
I think so. Emotional competence isn't easy to come by. And I think that the main reason for that is that we come from a society of, I guess, being brought up in, and I think I get a sense things are changing when I'm about to say this, right? But I'm a 46-year-old woman born in the 70s. And I think that for this demographic, and maybe other demographics that sort of around me, let's say, so maybe those right up into their sort of 60s, 70s, 80s. And then I would even go as far down as maybe 40s, 30s, and maybe late 20s. But I do think it's changing a little bit now with children. My point being is that we were brought up in a society where actually to nurture yourself from a place of compassion was a little bit selfish.
Yeah.
To not think of yourself, but to think of others. We must put other people first instead of putting ourselves first. And I think, and the reason I say I think we're seeing a change in that is that particularly now, if you look at some of the kind of the way that teachers are teaching in schools and the way that children are being spoken to about kindness and compassion, there does seem to be a little bit of a sea change there. Having said that, though, I do still think that a lot of that topic is about kindness for others. I think we've got to keep a real close eye on that. But the challenge, I think, is that because we aren't a society that is taught to put ourselves first, what we then do as a result of that is that when stuff happens that causes us a problem around our emotional well-being, we tend to turn away from it rather than turn into it, because we don't want to be seen as indulging ourselves in the kind of conversation, the dialogue around these are the problems that I've got, and these are the things that I need to talk about, these are the things that I need to get out there, and I need help, right? And that still happens now. We talk particularly around the mental health space. Stigma has been talked about for a number of years now, but there is still a stigma. I think the stigma is about a societal stigma, though. It's more about how we are nurtured at a younger age, and how actually as you come up into adulthood, it's not a natural thing to turn into your problems. It's more natural to turn away from it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is that if we're turning away from it emotionally, we're also then blocking out the physical responses to that stress or that emotion. So we're turning away from it completely from a human experience. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, absolutely. And it brings me really neatly actually onto, because I think one of the things you said at the sort of start of that piece was, how difficult it is developing emotional competence. And, Ross Burke describes how emotional competence does require us to feel our emotions. So really to turn into that, to also express our emotions, which, as you say, many of us have been brought up in an era where that really wasn't the way that we were taught.
Yeah.
And then to distinguish between the psychological reactions that are present to the present situation and those that represent a residue from the past, and how then we can develop the awareness of what are actually genuine needs that actually do require some form of satisfaction rather than their repression for the sake of gaining the acceptance or approval of others.
Yeah,
and again, just how common is that now, that we do things really because of the environment we're in for other people rather than this self-responsibility. And that's what I wanted to sort of bring this sort of towards. Really, we've talked about self-responsibility and noticing, and for me that sort of final bit just really encompassed a lot of those themes.
Yeah. The word self-care has much more meaning to it now than it ever did. And again, it's kind of, we move away from self-care being about we talked about this before, taking a hot bath with candles.
Yeah.
And drinking water. Self-care is actually so much more about turning into our challenges, facing into, what is it that's coming up for us when we have some challenges emotionally, physically, psychologically. That's what self-care is really all about. And you're right, Bridgette, the environment is a huge part of that. The environment, whether it's the environment at work, the environment we live in, the environment in terms of the building, the area, right, the road, down to the people that are in that space with us. And how that can really change the way that we see ourselves in the world that we're in. And that's the same for the working environment as well. But I think just going back to just what you were just talking about there, I think that the biggest challenge, as we've already talked about, it has to be firstly for us to be able to understand that if we spend all of our lives pushing away the reality of our experience, the more we push that away, the more we're hardening up against it. And the more we harden up against those experiences, the far more likely those things are going to manifest into something bigger over time and essentially catch us up and bite us in the arse, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So, and I think that that's a real challenge in itself, because the more we push this stuff away and we block it out and we harden up against it, the more over time that stuff could build up, and then later on down the track could be quite a big thing to deal with. So it's a bit like a snowball effect, I guess. But it's such an interesting topic.
Well, it is. And I was going to say, obviously that's just one small component actually of chapter 3 of this, amazing book. So if we've said some things there that you're thinking, well, actually there's some far more in there. Yes, there is. And certainly encourage you to read that. And as Steph says, it is very much about that, really not pushing away, but bringing in and coming in and exploring more. And, almost just really getting curious, about yourself and your own well-being.
Yeah, I think as well, Bridgette, knowing more about you now, and you're such an amazing coach, right? So one of the things, for me is that to some people watching this, they might feel it's really alien to even suggest that it's useful for all of us to be with what's there and turn towards that rather than away from it. But where do you start with that? Where do you start with that? What do we do with that first? Is it about sitting and just being? Is it about, for some people, is it about making some notes about what's coming up, doing some journaling? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think it's experimenting, and I think it's testing. I think it is getting to know ourselves better. And so all of those things you've mentioned will be right for somebody, but not all of them for everybody. And it's finding what's right for you. So I think for me, it was very much just sitting and being with myself quite a while, almost in the form of meditation. It wasn't meditation actually to begin with, but it did lead me to meditation. But I'm also very, from the coaching qualifications and work that I did, reflective practice and writing and journaling also helped me sometimes reconnect with that stillness. And it's finding your path, your map, the things that you can help connect one to the other, and it might not be the same thing all of the time. Is one of the things I've learned over time. You do need, like everything in life, you need a series of tools. You need to have them relatively polished and honed, and then just be able to call on them when you need them.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but don't put it off, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, don't put it off. Don't put it off. I just want to reference something. I was on an event last week, and we were talking about chronic stress, and talking about where chronic stress comes from, what it means, how to manage it, that kind of stuff. And the three things that we talked about in managing chronic stress was CBT, the MBSR 8-week program, mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is specifically looking at chronic stress and stress, and then thirdly, medication. But then I made a really important point that you don't need to do any of those three things if you do the fundamentals of looking after yourself before you actually get to that stage. And some of those things that you can do to look after yourself are, for instance, be social. So make sure that you have people around yourself that you can trust and have conversations with, and know that online interaction now is proven to be as effective as face-to-face physical interaction. And it's about the quality of that interaction, not the quantity. So it's about that ability to be able to listen and communicate in equal measure. So that was really interesting. The second thing, I won't talk about all of these, but the other two things that just absolutely brought the house down was that meditation can be really good for a lot of people. And then the third thing that I talked about was just sitting quietly for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I talked about sitting quietly for 5 minutes without any distractions. So no TV, no magazine, no tablet, no phone, and just to sit still and either do that with your eyes open or your eyes closed. Now, what was really interesting is when I talked about meditation, everybody just kind of went, oh no, that's not for me, it's not for me. And we talk about 50 people on the call here. And then when I talked about being quiet for 5 minutes with no distractions, loads of people went, actually, I might try that.
Yeah.
Right. So my point being is actually, you don't need to think about meditation as a traditional sitting on a cushion meditating, but actually just sitting still for 5 minutes, seeing what comes up and making a little note about that. If that's something that can work for that person, it might not, is a really good way just to start that journey. How am I feeling emotionally? What's going on for me here? How am I feeling physically? What's going on for me here? What's going on in my thoughts? What's going on for me here? And that can be the start, I think, for a lot of people to really start to unravel some of the stuff that might be going on that generally they would push away rather than welcome in. But the important thing, I think, is to take it slowly.
It is, and I think just to do what is accessible for you. So, even maybe the sitting quietly feels very alien, but maybe if you're out for a walk, maybe if you've got a dog and you walk the dog every day, maybe you just pause while you're walking the dog. You just rest on a wall or sit down on the ground if it's nice. You just gaze out at the view ahead of you. That can be that stillness.
Yeah, it really can.
You're watching maybe, but the eyes is quite soft. It is meditative. And I think that's the magic of it without labeling it as such. And I think it's finding those ways that make it accessible and connective for you. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, brilliant. Oh, thanks, Bridgette. That's a fantastic piece that you've taken from that book today. Another one to put on my reading list. Keep filling my reading list up. I'm literally going to have about 10 books that I need to be reading before the end of the year.
Oh, you've got holiday time coming up now, so we'll just want to fill your summer of reading.
I will. Yeah, I will. Don't you worry about that for sure. Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for your time, Bridgette. Really
You're very welcome.
Really good to chat with you again. And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Mind Body Connective, then don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe on YouTube. And tell people about it. And just keep following us. Lots more content to come. And we're really pleased that you could be here. Thanks so much. Thanks, Bridgette.
Cheers.